welcome back to my channel. My name is Laura, and today I'm going to be talking about banned books. Banned books is coming up. It's a whole week in September. It's from September 24th to September 30th. So I found a very interesting thing online where each year they had 10 books that they challenged. So I'm going to tell you the one book that I read from that challenge list and one book that I haven't read yet but plan to read soon. So it might be, I might read it this year, I might read it again another time. So, okay. So the first list that they do not have 2017 listed yet. They have 2016, and there's 10 books there. And out of the 10 books, I did read one of them. Okay, so I read one in the back in 2014. I read this book, and this book was challenged in 2016. It is Eleanor and Park by Rainbow Rowell. I had no idea that it was challenged. Now, why was this book challenged? It says challenge for offensive language. Okay, so you all know that I do not like to read books that are offensive language. I don't like that at all. However, I keep a journal, and here's my journal, and here is my Eleanor and Park, and this is my notes about that book that when I read it back in 2014. Okay, so I gave this book 5 stars. Yeah, I really enjoyed it, and my note says, I read this very, very fast. It kept my attention. It's about a red-headed girl who is about chubby, so she's kind of chunky. And she has some family problems, and she falls in love with a Korean boy. And all I wrote here is great love story. I had no offensive language written in here. I usually write it down if I come up with a lot of offensive language. So I have no idea why this book was challenged. Yeah, so I read that one. I gave it 5 stars. Yeah, somehow in 2016 it was challenged. So yeah. Okay, so out of the 10 books, that was one was listed. Out of the 10 books, there is one book that I own that I haven't read yet, and that book is Looking for Alaska by John Green. I have not read this yet. I have read John Green before. I have read Fault in Our Stars. I gave it 4 stars. I read Paper Towns. I gave that 3 stars. I think that's the only 2 books that I read by him. So I still have to read Looking for Alaska. And the challenge was, I want to see what this says. The challenge for Looking for Alaska in 2016, it says sexually explicit scene that may lead a student to sexual experimentation. So that's why this one was challenged. I have not read it yet. I may read it the last week of September because it is kind of short and I like to see what all the teens are reading. So yeah, and I own it. So that's that one. Moving on to 2015, I have read 2 books on this 10 list, and the 2 books that I read, one is YA and one is adult. Okay, so let me start with the YA book. The YA book that I read in 2015. I read it in 2015. Okay, the book was The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime by Mark Hayden. I will put the picture up here. Okay, this one was challenged for, give me a second to find it, The Curious, offensive language, religious viewpoints, unsuited for age group, and other profanity and atheism. Okay, so in my notes, I have my journal, and here is my book here. Okay, I gave it 3.5 stars. It's about a 16-year-old boy who is autistic, a bit confusing at times because the main character would go on a tangent using math problems, which became annoying and found myself skipping through the pages. And the main story is intriguing to keep me reading to the end. And again, I did not write anything about sexual explicit, whatever they said. I did not write anything about religious viewpoint. I did not write about offensive language. Usually if I find offensive language, I write it in my book because I don't like to read those books. But again, I gave this book 3.5 stars because it was a bit confusing to read with the math. So yeah, so that's that one. Okay. Moving on to the adult book. Now, I'm surprised that this one is on the list because this is an adult book. So, of course, the children aren't going to be reading this book. Okay. So, the book that's challenged in 2015 was 50 Shades of Grey. Yeah. People challenge this. Of course, little children are not supposed to be reading this book. Okay, so it says reasons for challenge was sexually explicit, unsuited for age group, and other poorly written concerns that a group of teenagers will want to try to read this. Yeah, this is an adult book, so teenagers should not be reading this. Yeah, an adult book. So anyway, yeah, this is erotica. It's on the erotica list. So yeah, so that's that one. Okay, so again, what do I want to read on the 15 list? There is this book that came up again. Here we go. This one, Looking for Alaska, was challenged again back in 2015. I have not read it yet, and I already gave my thoughts of this one. So that's that one. Okay, moving on to 2014. I read 2 of the books on the 10 list. And 2 of the books, one is YA, one is adult. And I'm going to share with you my thoughts of them. So the first book I read was The Perks of Being a Wallflower, and this one was, just find it, I'm trying to read it off the computer, hold on. It says drugs, alcohol, smoking, homosexuality, offensive language, sexually explicit, unsuited for age group, additional reasons, date rape, and masturbation. Okay, so in my book, I have a journal. I keep my journal, and here's my book and my notes next to it. Okay, so I read this book back in 2015, and I think I probably read it for Banned Book Week, and I gave this book 4 stars. I did put my notes in here, and my notes say, very depressing. He writes letters about drugs, alcohol, rape, suicide, homosexuality, mature audiences. And the cover creeped me out because every time I looked at the cover, it reminded me of a bat standing upside down, and I'm afraid of bats. So look at that cover, and this thing looks like a bat to me. If you don't wear my glasses, I know it's person's feet, but look at that. Doesn't that look like a bat? Anyway, so that one creeped me out, the cover. So yeah, so I agree that that should be on the ban list. So, okay, so the second book, I am very happy to see that this book made the banned list, okay? I read this back in 2014 when I started my YouTube channel, and I read it, and I was like, oh, this is when I started reading graphic novels, and I was like, I gave this book 5 stars when I read it, okay? The book is Saga, okay? And I have, this is what the book looks like. I have it in my journal here. It's Saga, and this is book 1. So when I first read it, I picked it up because all the teens were reading it, and my notes say, it says an adult graphic novel, science fiction, and porn. Naked people, sex, lots of inappropriate language, not for young readers. And that's what I wrote in my journal, okay? So what it says on here in Saga, it says, reasons for banning: anti-family, nudity, offensive language, sexually explicit, and unsuited for age group. Yeah, so I'm glad that that book made the ban list. Okay, so what is the book that I didn't read yet and I want to read? I have this book. This book, actually, I think both my daughters read it. I have not read it yet. It is a graphic novel. And the book that was banned in 2014 that I still have not read is Drama. And this one, they say, I haven't read it, so I don't know. It says sexually explicit. It is a graphic novel. It has pictures. So both my girls read this, and I know it's a quick read, so I'm pulling this out for maybe to read for my band week. So so far I have this one, and I have a Looking for Alaska pulled out from my shelves. Okay. Moving on to 2013, the book that I read was 50 Shades of Grey is on there again. I read that one. Looking for Alaska, I haven't read yet. Perks of Being a Wallflower, I already mentioned. And there is an additional one here that's The Hunger Games. The Hunger Games, I'll put the picture here. I read before I started my BookTube channel, and I read this back in 2012. I don't have any notes in my book, but I did give it 5 stars when I read it because it did keep my attention. I read from cover to cover, and it was before I started my YouTube channel. And it says reasons for banning is religious viewpoint and unsuited for age group. So that's that. So there's nothing really new that on this list except for Captain Underpants, which I don't even own. I don't even think my son has that book, but I don't think I want to read that anyway. And that's it for 2013. Moving on to 2012, I've read 2 books, new books that I didn't mention before. The first one is The Glass Castle, and I did see the movie. And the reason it was banned, let's see, reasons, is offensive language and sexually explicit. Okay, The Glass Castle is a non-fiction book. It's about the author, and it is an adult book. It's not YA. And I read it. I always journal about my books, and I write why I liked it or didn't like it in my journals. Okay, so I gave it 4.5 stars. I really enjoyed the book. It's very hard to rate nonfiction because it is the author's life, and yeah, so it's hard to rate that. But okay, so the book was heartbreaking to read. Her parents traveled and back and forth, and she still was able to become successful. Some stories were outrageous. Some of her stories were outrageous, but it is a true story. So I didn't write anything about explicit. There was one scene that was explicit. They even have it in the movie. But yeah. So I could see that this is banned for young adults to read. So that's that one. Okay. The second book that was that I read in 2000, I just read this one recently. I read it in 2017 actually. Is 13 Reasons Why, and the reasons it was banned is drugs, alcohol, smoking, sexually explicit, suicide, unsuitable for age group. So I read it in 2017 because I wanted to watch the TV show, and I gave it 4 stars. And I have it in here, and I have my notes next to it and everything. So it says the show is on Netflix, and Hannah is a high school student who commits suicide. Not a Light Story has a strong message about being nice to others. Every little mean act can impact others. I dropped a star because the POVs found were hard to read and confusing. So that's why I dropped it down a star. I gave it 4 stars. So yeah, so that's that. Okay, so what is the book that I didn't read yet on the 2012 list that I want to read, that I own? Okay, it's The Kite Runner. I have not read this. This is an adult book, adult fiction, and The Kite Runner was banned because it says homosexuality, offensive language, religious viewpoint, and sexually explicit. So yeah. So that's this one. This is an adult book, so I could see it banned for young adults to read. So that's that one. Moving on to 2011. Okay, I read The Hunger Games, and I read this one book, This is the only book that I have read twice in my lifetime, and if you've watched my channel, you all can guess what it is. The book is To Kill a Mockingbird. That's the only book that I've read twice in my entire life. I read it in school because it was required reading, and then when I started my YouTube channel, I read it my second year of doing my YouTube channel. So yeah, so it was a reread for me, and I never reread books because there's so many books out there that I still need to read. And so I like to have new stuff. So anyway, so the reason To Kill a Mockingbird was banned, it says offensive language and racism. So my notes, as I said, I always keep a journal. So here's my journal. Okay. The second time that I read it, I gave it 3 stars. I started to read the physical book, but then I got stuck and I switched to audiobook because it was hard to read. So anyway, the writing style was hard to get used to, even on the audiobook. I love the school scenes. It is very racial, uses, I don't want to say this out loud, very racial, school brutality, rape, and even mentions Hitler at one point. So yeah. So that's what I have in my notes. Yeah, so that's that one. It uses the N word, and I don't really like using that word, so I put that in my notes here. So what book haven't I read that I own that is on the 2011 list? This is a book that I found on my daughter's shelf. Yeah, she has some banned books up there. And this is the book that I have not read yet. It's TTYL by Lauren Miracle. And the reason this one was banned, actually the whole series was banned. My daughter has this one and another one of the series on her shelf. It says reasons: offensive language, religious viewpoint, sexually explicit, unsuitable for age group. So yeah, and this one is written really strangely because see how that's written? It's like Texas throughout the whole thing. Now I have not read this yet. So yeah, I don't know how interesting this will be to read, but yeah, I think that this is book 1 of the series. She has this one in softback and she has the other book in hardback, so I'm thinking that this one is book 1. So yeah, so that's this one. 2010. I've read this book. It is very popular. It was very popular. A lot of people hate it though. The book that I read in 2010 is Twilight, and I read this way before my YouTube channel. It was when it first came out, and I enjoyed it, but the reason it was banned was because it has religious viewpoint and violence in it. So yeah, I don't know, I don't remember reading it. I know it's about vampires, but yeah, so that got me into reading, and it wasn't a bad book because it did get me to read, and it was not a reader. I hated reading, actually. Okay, so the book on 2010's list that I haven't read yet and I own is Crank by Ellen Hopkins, and the reason this one was banned, it says drugs, offensive language, sexually explicit. So yeah, so I own this one, and this could be a choice to read the last week of September. So yeah, so that's this one. And she always writes things like that, so I really think that her book should not be YA, it really should be adult. But anyway, so that's my thoughts on Ellen Hopkins, and she writes in verse, so if you haven't read, all her books are written like that. So yeah, it's a quick read, but she does do inappropriate things in her books. So that's that one. Okay. Okay, I was going to stop after doing the top 5, the last 5 years. But as I read on, I found a book that I'm currently reading on here. So I was very interested, and I wanted to share this with you. So in 2009, the book that I am currently reading is one of my favorite authors, and the book that was challenged in 2009 is My Sister's Keeper by Jodi Picoult. So I was very surprised to see this on the banned list, and the reason this book was banned, let me give a second to find it on here. My Sister's Keeper. It was book number 7 on the banned list in 2009. And the reasons, it says homosexuality. Now, I'm reading this book. I'm almost at the very end. I only have a few chapters left to read. You could see my bookmarks there. I haven't come up to that point. So I don't know if it's at the end of the book or what, but I don't have that. I guess I missed something when I was reading it, but I thought this was kind of interesting. Okay, why else was this banned? It says offensive language. It wasn't that bad because I'm reading it and I'm enjoying it. Religious viewpoint. It could, the religious part I could see. Sexism, sexually explicit. I haven't seen much of it in here. And unsuitable age group and violence. I haven't seen any violence in this book, and I know that this is an adult book, so I don't think young children should be reading this, but I was really surprised to see this on the list. So yeah, and I'm currently reading this one, so pretty interested in that. I'm reading a banned book and I didn't even know about it, so that's that. Okay, so what is on that list that I own that I haven't read yet? The book that I have on my in my shelves is this one, The Color Purple by Alice Walker. I have not read this one yet. This is a classic, and the reason that this one was banned, give me a second to find it. Okay, it says offensive language, sexually explicit, and unsuited for age groups. So I haven't read yet, so I don't know, but this is an option for my last week of September. So that's that. So in conclusion, I have 6 books to read for the last week of September. Of course, I'm probably only going to get to 1 or 2 of those. So I have The Color Purple, I have Crank, I have TTYL, which seems very interesting because it's that strange writing, but I don't know. The Kite Runner, which is an adult book, and I have a graphic novel, which is all pictures, which is pretty interesting, and I have Looking for Alaska. So those are the 6 books that I have to choose from. Oop, can't even hold them right. So very interesting video. It was fun to do this. Thank you for watching. If you have read any of these 6 books, let me know in the comments below if I should try reading them for the end of September. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in another video. Bye.